Why pay more for your precious metals from the big guys with offices on Wall Street and who bank with JP Morgan? Get your fizz from the doc at SDBullion.com.
This is the Doc and Eric Dubin with the SD Weekly Metals and Markets Wrap. Well, Eric, the gold and silver beatdown certainly continued this week, particularly looking at the 72-hour gold charts here. The algos have been in action, and just the beatdown has been relentless. They were successful in pushing gold down through 1250, and once the stops were triggered there, it traded almost all the way down to 1225 this afternoon here on Friday, and really hasn't recovered off of those lows. Trading the access market here, it's been trading this afternoon just above 1230. Silver did have a bit more of a recovery off the overnight bottom Thursday night into Friday of around 1840. Trading back above 1850 here on Friday. So what's your take on the beatdown? Are we seeing an early indication here with silver that the bottom is in, or should we look out below as the Globex opens Sunday night?
Hold on, let me go get my flak jacket and helmet. Just weeks like this are really just kind of taking the spirit out of even a diehard like myself, I got to admit. But when you look at the trading actions, it does reveal that there's a lot of people out here who are looking to buy the dips and stepping up to the plate. I mean, Thursday's action in silver was horrific. Silver definitely was being used to lead the entire complex down. But what was really interesting throughout the day, once New York opened and regular trading in our stock markets launched, we actually saw quite a bit of action when it comes to the buy side for mining shares, and that's typically an indicator that the deep pocket money, the bigger institutional players that are not buying into this whole gold as archaic relic kind of nonsense, and understanding that on a relative basis there's a lot of value in these companies with their assets in the ground. They started buying gold and silver stocks pretty aggressively. And then when we saw silver beginning to catch a bid along with gold, but then gold kind of went sideways throughout the rest of Friday, but silver has continued to hold up pretty well. That all speaks to this kind of bottom fishing attitude that's amongst a lot of the players that just kind of hang on the sidelines. And frankly, more often than not, a lot of these big money players are well aware of the manipulation, and they just let the powers that be do their thing, and then they go after the mining shares once a big raid has taken place, and they accumulate. They're smart money actors. Last week we talked about how if we did slice through 19 on silver, it probably wouldn't stay there that long, and I'm still of that opinion, even though we've been down here for a couple of days. And next week, hopefully, we'll see some kind of a rebound as this continuation of buying the dips governs the trade next week. You've also been seeing some pickup in physical demand too, and that's really interesting because that corroborates the kind of signals that we're seeing when it comes to the mining shares yesterday and silver bouncing and so forth. So when you share that with our audience, I think that they'll find that pretty interesting. Yeah, we've really just seen an explosion in physical demand at SDBullion, and really the same thing across the retail sector here in the U.S. and the wholesale market. We're seeing the supply of 90% begin to draw it down. There's really been ample supply over the last few months. Premiums have started to creep up a bit here Thursday and Friday. They haven't moved up much, but I would expect if it continues at all next week, 90% will be one of the early signs of indication. And also here on Friday, the Sunshine Mint is now about 3 weeks out on new round orders for the first time since May. And as regular listeners will recall, the Sunshine Mint, who supplies the blanks to the U.S. Mint for the Silver Eagle program, they were the last mint, or really of anything, of any of the government coins or any private bars or rounds, to have production issues and delays coming out of the shortage we saw over the past 12 to 18 months.
but really they've been live all over the summer since I think early May. And so as of today on Friday, for the first time, new round orders are 3 to 4 weeks out. Now that might have a little bit to do with the Sunshine Mint is releasing a brand new round for the first time in the first week of October. It's a Buffalo round with their patented security mint mark. So it's possible they're allocating a bit of their production to that, but really I think it has a lot more to do with the market action this week and just the massive volumes of physical metal sales. At SDBullion, I think we had about 200 orders yesterday on Thursday, and really since about Wednesday afternoon, the phones haven't stopped ringing, and we've had every single trader on the desk answering all the phones. So kind of as you mentioned with the mining sector, people are putting their money where their mouth is, looking at 1850 in silver as a likely bottom. Again, we're within 50 cents of the bottom placed back in end of June, early July of 2013 at 18, and that was only there for a moment, or else you missed it. So we're at some of the lowest levels we've seen in 5 or 6 years, at or very near to it. So it continues to be an excellent time to either begin to add to your stack or accumulate to it. And what's interesting, one other anecdote I'll throw in here, Thursday and Friday, we've probably had the most first-time silver investors in a year. So I'm talking about people calling us for the first time. I've never bought any silver in my life from anyone. Not like I just haven't bought it from you. I've never bought a round of silver, an ounce of silver in my life, and I'm going to put $20,000 into the metal. So it's kind of been interesting that we've seen a big uptake and a surge, if you will, of brand new investors into the market here.
Have you seen something similar when it comes to gold?
I mean, we have, but the proportion has been much stronger in silver, actually, of people just straight out telling us, hey, I've never bought silver anywhere. This is the first time I'm buying it. Walk me through the process and
Wow.
talk about and all the normal questions of what do you recommend, bars, rounds, coins, government coins. But people saying that I really don't have any clue what I want to buy. I just know I want to buy silver.
Well, that's a fascinating trend. Definitely keep us abreast on how that evolves going forward. It'd be very interesting to see if there's new people coming in on a consistent basis. So I guess the other thing that we should touch on is just, congratulations to the powers that be, because they've been very successful in making people think that the economy is all well and fine, that we don't have real unemployment above 20% when they're reporting 6 and change percent, and on and on and on. It's almost like when we produce these shows every week that we're stepping into the twilight zone in an alternative reality. But the fact is that for the most part, most Americans are just either too busy or distracted or ignorant as to what really is going on when it comes to the longer-term risk factors to our currency and geopolitical risks and just, the ongoing inflation that, according to John Williams' estimations of the computation methods of inflation of 1980, if they were used today, we'd be running in like 9 or 10% inflation now. And, everybody's personal experience speaks to that, and you can see that at the grocery store or medical bills or what have you. But, the fact that we're in sub-$19 silver now speaks to the ability of the powers that be to manipulate things. And as we are standing at the 13-year anniversary of 9/11, we couldn't think of a better way to talk about that dynamic when it comes to politics. So we're going to bring on an interview that we recorded earlier today with Tod Fletcher, who's part of the 9/11consensus.org organization. And we hope you enjoy that. And we figured that we'd bring a little bit more truth. We're 9/11 truthers here. We're not afraid to admit it, just as much as the fact that we're spotlighting all of the shenanigans and corruption when it comes to our metals markets and financial markets overall. So with that as a segue, we'll introduce Tod.
Joining us on this week's show on the 13th anniversary of the 9/11 tragedy is Tod Fletcher. one of the experts with consensus911.org. Thanks for joining us today, Tod.
Thank you very much for having me, John.
And Tod, this is a really interesting project that you've gotten involved with. My understanding is that David Ray Griffin was one of the founders, and you've done work with him all the way back to his original book, The New Pearl Harbor. And I believe that was published in 2004. Did your work with him as a researcher begin at that point as well?
Actually, it began on his second book, which was the 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions, which also came out in 2004. The New Pearl Harbor, his first book, came out in the spring, and then the second book came out toward the end of the year. And in between those two, there was the 9/11 Commission Report was published by the government. And David Ray Griffin's second book that was the first one that I assisted him on, was a response to the 9/11 Commission Report. And I've worked with Griffin since then as an assistant, not a writer, but I give him editorial assistance, a little bit of research assistance, and I've worked on 9 books with him. He's now written 10 books on 9/11, and I've assisted him on the last 9 of those 10.
That's amazing. And for the people in our audience that are unfamiliar with David Ray Griffin, he is an emeritus professor of philosophy of religion and theology at the Claremont School of Theology at the Claremont Graduate University. And he's published over 37 books and is considered to be a very diligent and careful researcher and academic. And as Tod, you'll no doubt appreciate that, when it comes to investigating big public tragedies like 9/11, there's wonderful research, and then there's just people who just kind of climb up on a soapbox, open up a website, and speculate on all manner of things related to their own investigations. There's so much noise when it comes to 9/11 research, and it's really difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff. And what you guys are doing at consensus911.org helps to focus in on what is the very best of research out there. Can you talk a bit about the process by which the 22 people involved that all are professional researchers or have significant background to deal with particular aspects of the whole 9/11 story, and how, in fact, you put together these consensus points?
Sure. The consensus panel, which is at consensus911.org. The consensus panel is an organization that was founded about 3 years ago by David Ray Griffin and the co-founder Elizabeth Woodworth, and they're the administrators of the panel. And there are 22 members, of whom I'm one. And what we're trying to do is to identify the best evidence that tells us what actually happened on 9/11. And so, our basic orientation is that the government and the media haven't presented the best evidence. They've largely presented a story that suits their purposes. But in fact, there's much evidence which they downplay or suppress that tells us much more about what actually happened. But this position that we've reached over now 13 years of research, is not something that we use to bias. What we're trying to do is to actually evaluate the evidence and see what the best evidence is. So we're comparing the official story and the evidence that the official account presents to back up its story with other evidence that raises doubts about the official story and that may be much more convincing as to what really happened. So the consensus panel, we produce what are called consensus points, and these are points of information that deal with very specific aspects of the 9/11 events. And so we have points about the Twin Towers, what happened to the Twin Towers. We have points about what happened to World Trade Center 7. We have a few about the Pentagon. We have quite a number on the 9/11 flights, on military exercises that were going on during the day. We have points about the hijackers, about the phone calls that supposedly established the presence of hijackers on the planes. And we have other points as well. And for each one of these, we went through a process of considering the official account, considering the evidence that that account brought forward as supporting it, and then considering other evidence and trying to come up with what looked like the most plausible reality. And the way we do it is a very objective way. We've got a protocol that was adopted from medical science for developing treatment, disease treatment protocols. When these protocols are established, there's a blind method used to get the input of all the professionals who have been, part of that process, and they try to come up with a protocol based on their independent evaluation of all the evidence. So that's what we're trying to do. So we get these draft points that have been written up and sent out to us that are presenting the official account, the alternative evidence, and then we look at this and evaluate what we see, and we evaluate the whole point as whether we think it's something we agree with or something we disagree with. We give it a quantitative, a numerical evaluation, and we send these evaluations back to the administrators, David Ray Griffin and Elizabeth Woodworth, and they use an algorithm to assess the level of consensus that's been reached. It's a numerical thing. We have to reach an 85%, I believe it is, consensus for this to be adopted as a point, and we're usually, for all of our points, I think have been quite a bit higher than 85%. Overall, I'd say we're very confident that that the official account of virtually every aspect of 9/11 is false. In fact, they're just a bunch of lies, and we present counter evidence that shows that these accounts are false.
You're one of these evil truthers. How dare you?
Well, definitely a truther. I don't know about evil, though.
Yeah. I was amused, I think it was about a week and a half ago, that Ron Paul came out and basically made some very, very mild comments about skepticism, about the government narrative, and the media jumped all over him, calling him a truther and a tinfoil hatter, and
sure,
all of the typical attacks that the media is wont to do.
Yep.
And even at this late date, where a very large percentage of the American people truly understand that, in the very least, the official story is just bunkum. I've seen various polls that suggest that 20, 30, 40%, depending on the poll, depending on when it was taken and what kind of questions, but basically that significant percentage of the American public understand that this was a true false flag operation. What's your sense as to where the American people are 13 years after the event? How many people, on a percentage basis, would you guesstimate kind of know that the official story is not right, and maybe even that it wasn't just incompetence theory or allowed to happen, but in fact was at some level or another, or a combination of shadow government and officialdom perpetrating the event?
Yeah, it's very hard for me to put a number on it. I think it's somewhere in that ballpark that you mentioned, maybe 30% or 40%. It's actually considerably higher in several foreign countries. It's, I believe, higher in Canada. I know it's higher in Germany and France. But in the United States, it's not as high as we would like. We've been trying for many years to raise the level of awareness of the counter evidence to the official account. But nevertheless, it is quite high. I'm not sure whether at this point those numbers are rapidly changing, or not. But we like to, we feel that we need to continue working as hard as we can on this because of the importance of the issue, whether Americans are listening to us, or not. Eventually, if enough rational people keep insisting that something of this importance be looked at seriously, we're hoping that this is going to happen. There's within the 9/11 Truth movement more broadly, there's some really notable campaigns. There's the amazing campaign that's being carried out by architects and engineers of 9/11 Truth who focus on what happened at the World Trade Center, and they've made a lot of, they've had a big impact, I believe, convincing people that the buildings in New York City were brought down by controlled demolition, and not just two of them, a third one as well, the World Trade Center 7, which came down at 5:20 in the afternoon. in a classic controlled demolition in 6 seconds, reaching free fall speed, meaning that there was absolutely nothing underneath the upper portion of the building supporting it. It had to have been removed by explosives that all went off at the same moment, or it would have gone down, tilted over instead of coming straight down with a flat roof at free fall speed for over 200 feet. And this has made an impact, I think, a very significant impact, especially in New York City. And there are other initiatives going on there. There's a major attempt to get the city, to force the city to investigate 9/11. There's a petition drive going on, run by family members of the victims in the World Trade Center collapses. And we've got a giant billboard now in the Times Square that shows WTC-7 coming down. I believe that's architects and engineers have put that up. So we're making impact. We've managed to be on television now and again, and on radio shows, and the kind of visibility that you guys can provide is the key. That's what's going to determine whether this viewpoint finally is heard by the majority of Americans.
Now, Todd, one question I would have, as we've discussed here, a growing number of Americans are being exposed to the information, but there's still a large majority who, even those who don't pay attention or view mainstream media, those here in the alternative sphere, who you might suspect would be awake to what happened on 9/11. They still accept the official story. So for people like that, what would you tell them is the smoking gun, or if there is one? Is it Building 7? Is it the towers just collapsing at free fall speed? If you had to pick one smoking gun, what would you say, or what would you call it?
I think the smoking gun, the Achilles heel, really is World Trade Center 7. It's so obviously a classic controlled demolition. It looks exactly like classic, controlled demolitions that you will undoubtedly have seen on television. That's because it is one. It was one. Whereas the two towers, which were also demolished, according to the best evidence, they're not classic controlled demolitions. The buildings there went down in a non-classical manner. But WTC-7, another factor about it, not only is it so obviously a controlled demolition, but it was never hit by a plane. There's absolutely no official explanation that comes even close to explaining what happened to that building at 5:20 in the afternoon. So this is considered to be the Achilles heel of the official account. Now, there are many others. I mean, the Pentagon, from my perspective, is another very obvious weak point in the official account, the total lack of any parts of the plane, either outside or inside, no major parts of the plane, no wings, no fuselage, no tail. No seats, no bodies visible either outside on an undamaged lawn, nor inside the Pentagon. Just fine pieces that can't be identified is all that was visible. And of course, the similarity of that Pentagon situation with the field in Pennsylvania where the plane supposedly crashed. And once again, there's no wings, no tail, no fuselage, no seats, no bodies, nothing visible, but just sort of charred bits of whatever, Those are weak points, but I think the World Trade Center 7 is the real Achilles heel. David Ray Griffin has written a tremendous book on World Trade Center 7. It's called The Mysterious Collapse of World Trade Center 7, and he shows there in great detail that all the attempts by the federal government, the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, to explain what happened to WTC-7 are completely unconvincing. In fact, he demonstrates that they committed scientific fraud. They fraudulently made claims that are false. They never tested any physical evidence. They used a computer model, a black box that they could tweak parameters until they made their video come out right. They published a video that looks absolutely nothing like what you see when you watch WTC-7 come down on videos at YouTube. So they couldn't even come close. They had no way to explain it. That, I think, is the true Achilles heel, and people should pay attention to the billboard there in Times Square, and they should pay attention to what architects and engineering for 9/11 Truth, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth are putting out, because they're really trying to go for the weakest spot of the official story.
And then as a follow-up to that, most people, if they're exposed to that for the first time, the reaction is going to be, why? So as a follow-up, what would you tell those people as far as motive? What does, I guess you personally, as well as Consensus 9/11, what does the evidence point to as really the ultimate motive? Is it really just the taking away of our freedoms? Obviously, there's been a lot of reports of all the financial records that were destroyed, Silverstein's policy for the towers. What, with your research, is your guys' view on the ultimate motive?
I would like to speak just for myself here, because the different members might emphasize different things. And one other thing that I would say is that we're focusing at the consensus panel on the best evidence, and we really don't make any attempts to speculate about motives at all. But speaking as an individual, and I think it's probably like the most important question, I would say that there were two primary motives. One was to enable the launching of wars to move in more forcefully in Central Asia, and the other was the removal of our civil liberties and our privacy, and the establishment of a non-democratic regime in the United States that's able to surveil everyone in real time. I think that they needed, and in fact, one of the things we do, and it might be a good place for people to start at the consensus panel, is to take a look at our section G, consensus points about the political and military commands on 9/11, because it shows that many of the people who were in charge that day, like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, General Eberhart, General Myers, and various other, they told stories about what they were doing that day that are not true, and the best evidence shows that what they said they were doing and what they were actually doing were different. And these people were in charge that day, and what happened that day seems to have been something that they were, actively participating in, according to the best evidence that we've got. So the question is, who are they? What are their background? What are their allegiances? And I think it shows that they're closely related to neocons in the Bush administration, who prior to Bush's being installed by the Supreme Court in a judicial coup in 2000 had been in the Project for the New American Century, where they put up publications calling for taking over Central Asia. They even talked about the need for a new Pearl Harbor, and they wanted to attack Iraq. They launched this two-prong attack on 9/11 9 months after they came into power. First there was 9/11, and then a couple weeks later started the anthrax attacks. The first one, 9/11, was to launch the war in Afghanistan, in my view, and the anthrax attacks, which were obviously by the same group of perpetrators. A new book has come out called The 2001 Anthrax Deception that shows that the hijackers were actually set up to look as if they had been interested in, that is, the alleged hijackers, the 19 Arabs. Part of their activity prior to 9/11 was trying to rent crop dusters so that they could spray chemicals over the countryside. And the attempt there was to bring Iraq into the sites, and the anthrax attacks were trying to get the war on Iraq underway. So they had a major war objective, but they also had the Patriot Act all written ahead of time, and the anthrax attacks knocked down whatever resistance there was in Congress, as some of the letters were sent to key senators in the Congress. And so the Patriot Act was passed by Congress without having been debated or even read, and this was the thing that cut into our, started to break down our civil liberties. Of course, much was done by presidential executive order, surveillance things were established. But I think it's a dual objective of both war abroad and oppression at home.
Tod Fletcher with consensus911.org. It's great to have you today, Tod. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed talking with you guys. Thanks a lot.
All right. For Eric Dubin and the Doc, thanks for tuning in to the SD Weekly Metals and Markets.
Those individuals who are in charge of monetary policy around the world, I think they're very much aware of what is coming. When I've asked Federal Reserve chairmen in the committee about this, they never said, no, that's not going to happen. They use the word orderly. As long as it's orderly, it seems to be okay.